Hello and welcome to the video for Monday, October 19th for game design. I'll let you guys in from the waiting room. Hello. Hi, Nick. And hello, Coulter. How are you guys doing today? And hello to everybody else. Hey, while you guys are jumping into the class here, I'm going to do the attendance here. Let's see. All right, Pima. And then go to the attendance. All right. All right, so game design attendance. See who all is here. And put you guys in. Okay. And then got all those guys done. Okay, good. You guys doing okay today? All right.
Doing pretty good.
Yeah?
How about you?
I'm doing good. Starting to feel a little bit like the holiday season with the cooling temperatures, and we don't get the changing leaves and all that cool stuff here or snow. So about all you have is it goes from 100 degrees to 90. And you're like, yeah, fall.
Yeah, it's great. Fantastic.
It's pretty awesome. So let's see. Creed says, hey, everyone. Hey, Greg. Would it be all right if I present Wednesday after Olivia? I'm not able to use my mic today, but Mia will be off on Wednesday, so that would work out a lot better for me. Oh, yeah, that's not a problem, Creed. All right, so let me check the class website. All right, game design. All right. Okay, and then I also have, let's see, now let me see who's here. Okay, I have one more student. I'm not sure if he did his presentation yet or not, but if he shows up, we'll see if he has one ready or if he's already done it. Okay, let me see. I gotta admit some more people from the waiting room. Okay, and it looks like all those people are in. Let me see who joined us. Okay. All right, so I think what I'm going to do is start out with, I'll share my screen. And here's our post for today. I'm going to start out with this week's blog post, so I'll go there. Okay, and I'll make this kind of big. So, you guys know I'm working on a game called Diner Duel. And so a lot of my insights of this blog are, based on the work that I do on that every week. And today's blog post is no exception. And it's the first of a multi-part series of blog posts I want to do. And this series is called Designing Games with the IKEA Method. And it starts out, if you visit IKEA's website, you will find this statement. At IKEA, we design the price tag first and then develop the product to suit the price. It's a brilliant way to create a product, and as a result, IKEA is enormously successful. But how can you apply this philosophy to tabletop game design? First, let's look at some of the key factors customers consider when buying a board game. So, of course, they look at price. Now, says an independently produced board game aimed at the hobbyist market costs between $45 and $80. Now, we're not talking about mom and pop. We're talking about people who, buy board games and are very passionate about them, so they're willing to spend a little more of their cheddar on board games. So it says, so we will use $60, which is an average price point for our game. This range does not include mass market games that have few pieces like Monopoly, which is sometimes sold for under $20, or independent games for the super hobbyists, which is a higher echelon of hobbyists, the people who are willing to pay $150 for Gloomhaven or one of the big board games that have like hundreds of pieces and miniatures and all kinds of cool stuff. Okay, so people look at price when they're going to buy a board game. They look at the length of the gameplay. So how long does it take to trigger the victory conditions? And in the average board game will last between 45 minutes and an hour. And of course, there's exceptions to that. There's board games or card games, especially that can happen in 30 minutes. There's board games like Risk or even Monopoly that can take hours or days. It depends on how you play. Number of players, 2 to 5, is a pretty common standard nowadays. Number and type of game components. So of course, games with expensive components like little miniature models are going to cost more. And that's going to, put a premium on the price because they have to pay for all that extra stuff. The artwork, and it says most board games have painterly or cartoon artwork done by professional illustrators, so that's got to be paid for. And then the type of game, the genre, people tend to buy games in one of several genres in which they already play, for example, strategy games. So every now and then people will try a new kind of game, like a party game or a puzzle game or something like that. But, especially with adults, they've kind of focused in on some genres that they like, and then they tend to buy games in that genre. So, okay, so these are some of the things people consider when buying a game, right? So let's say that we're making a game, a board game, and we want to use the IKEA method, and we're going to start talking about price. So what we want to do is we want to sell our game for $60, and so that's higher than the average person is going to pay, but something that a hobbyist, somebody who's really focused on board games, will pay. So it says we're going to consider the cost of two of the most expensive game components: the actual board itself for the board game and the box that the whole game comes in. And we're going to figure out how to reduce the price of each, right? So I'm going to give you some figures here from the Game Crafter, which is, it's the printing house that will do print-on-demand production of board and card games. They're well-liked and well-respected in the industry. They do a great job, but they're very busy. And whenever you order something from them, it takes 3 weeks to get it in. And by ordering something from them, I mean like a board game. When you order just components, it's much quicker. But they have a big backlog of people, and so and their stuff is it's pricey because they're printing one-offs. And if you print, obviously economies of scale. If you print 100 of something, they'll give you a discount. If you print 1,000 of something, a much better discount, right? But one-off, print on demand is the priciest way you can go to produce anything. So it says here, if indie publishers want to have a distributor handle their games, they have to sell them for at least 50% off the retail price, okay? So in other words, when you sell your game, you could sell it to a distributor who will then get it to a retailer, right? And whatever cost your game is, whatever you want it to sell for, that $60 is what we want. We have to sell it to the distributor at 30, and then they're going to mark it up a certain amount to sell to the retailer, who's then going to mark it up a certain amount to sell it to the customer. So everybody, gets their hand in the pie a little bit, Now, that 50% is pretty standard. However, if you're selling on Amazon, they demand 55% discount. So in other words, instead of $30, it would be less than $30 you'd have to produce the game for, including your profit, in order to make any money to sell it off of Amazon. Now, so what I'm saying is, if you go to a regular distributor and the price of the game is $60, you have to be able to afford to sell it to that distributor for $30. And so let's assume you want to make a profit of $5 on every game. So that means you now have a budget. All of your game components together have to equal $25 or less. Now, that becomes problematic if you want to do the print-on-demand thing and you want to use the existing services that are out there. Game Crafter is one of the most popular. There's another one called Print and Play, which is a competitor of theirs. They They cost more, but they'll send you things much faster. So you have some different choices, but when it comes to price alone, GameCrafter is the better choice. But let's look at the figures here for just the board and the box, right? It says creating a board game for $25 that people will pay $60 for at retail is hard to do. Purchasing a printed game board will cost you $10 at the GameCrafter, and an average size box will also cost you $10, right? Now, in addition to that $20, GameCrafter adds like 84 cents on as their own surcharge for making games. Then they add tax, and then they add shipping. When all that's added up, your board and your box are going to equal $31.76, right? Now, remember, your budget is $25 for the entire game, and you just spent $31.76 on just the board and the box, right? So, you still have to get, so first of all, there goes your profit, right? Secondly, you still have to pay for game cards, tokens, dice, rule book, and, the artist who produces all the work that the game uses, right? And this is, assuming you're not doing it yourself. If you are doing it yourself, then great. That's one fewer expense. Now, so in my game Diner Duel, I looked at that and I said, I don't want to, I can't pay $31 for that stuff. I got to pay a lot less than that so I can buy the other stuff. So I say in my game Diner Duel, the game board is actually a red and white checkerboard pattern. It's what's referred to as a gingham pattern, because my game takes place in a diner in the 1950s. It takes place actually on the tabletop of a diner. And so I was like, well, it's a very common pattern, that gingham pattern. Maybe I can find it on something else that costs less than $10. So sure enough, I looked around and I found these cloth napkins. Let me open this up here. I found this 12-pack of cloth napkins that costs like $19.99. It's on sale for $17.99 right now. And when you open up these napkins, they're actually a little bigger than a board game. I think the board game is like 16 by 16, the board itself, and these napkins are 20 by 20. And these napkins are like super heavy cloth, and they have really nice hemmed edges. And when you put them down, they lay flat, and you can actually turn them into a board for a board game. All the little spaces there just become little spaces that you move your pieces on. So I did the math. I ordered some of these. I did the math, and it turns out that if I buy these, I buy them from Amazon. I've got Amazon Prime, so I'm not paying for shipping. I'm just paying a little for tax. It turns out that I'm paying $1.67 each for these napkins, right? As opposed to, let's see. Oh, well, I'm sorry. It said tax is only about $2 for the set of 12. So that's included in the $1.67. So now I have a game board, which is actually a napkin, and it costs $1.67 as opposed to the $10 plus shipping and tax that GameCrafter would charge me. Now, there is a caveat here, which is, you have to convince the public, your customers, that they can use a napkin as a game board and it's okay. It's not going to be problematic. But so that's a potential problem, but you could turn it into a potential strength too. It could be a hook for the game. You could say, this game is like no other. We use an innovative technique. We have an actual napkin for the game board, which corresponds to the, napkins used in, 50s diners. Or you can spin it any way you want, but bottom line is it's a way to reduce cost. Now it says, so using the napkin, it's going to save me $8.33 over the original price of the board. So that's a huge saving, right? Now, the next thing I got to deal with is the box, right? The box costs $10 as well, plus shipping and tax. So I decided to look online and found some boxes. I didn't find them on Amazon, but I'll show you let's see, the kind of stuff they have. So we say like white cardboard shipping boxes, okay? And what I found was I found a box which is quite like this, but also has these nice little flaps that tuck into the end here. It's called a tuck box. Let's see. Here's an example of it right here. These little flaps tuck into there. but it's more like this kind of a box here. So it's designed to be a shipping box, but it can also be a product box, and it looks pretty good. And it's very cheap. You know, when you price these out, they cost a couple bucks a box. So I found some boxes. I ordered some samples, and like I said, the boxes cost about $2 a piece. But if you include tax and shipping, I'm gonna knock that up to 250. And then what I decided to do was use a screen printing press to print on the boxes myself. I happen to have a screen printing press, so I don't have to add the cost of that into the equation, right? But I do have to buy ink and I have to buy screens. And so I'm going to add another 50 cents onto the cost of each box. So that is going to bring my total cost to $3 per box, saving $7 over, you know, the cost from buying from Game Crafter. Now, the design I'm doing for this box, you guys saw an earlier design of this in an earlier post, but what I did was I designed it so it could be printed in 2 colors. And what I was going for was kind of a 50s look. In the 50s, you know, I found some vintage boxes of toys and games on eBay, and they would use like red and blue, and they would have these, you know, kind of funny graphics and stuff. So I took my graphic and I converted it to that. Um, so this is the box graphic. It looks it kind of reminds me of like a box of soap or something like that. It's got those colors. Maybe it's the borax colors or the Clorox colors. But this can be printed in 2 colors, just blue and red, on the white box and look really good. So let me go back here. Sorry about all these extra screens popping up. Um, okay, so I've got the cost of the napkin and the screen printing, and it says, let me go make this a little bigger. It says not including tax and shipping charges, the box and board will cost $20. That was the original price, you know, and then it's like almost $12 more of the shipping and tax. Now it says, okay, it says the total amount that I'm spending on my napkin and my box for each game is $11.33. So that's pretty close to half the cost of the $25 right there. But it's also about, well, actually, it's more like half the cost of the $20 I was going to spend with Game Crafter. It says since my production budget is $25, it means I now have an additional $16.33 to spend on game components. So that means I can afford to buy the cards and the tokens and the dice and all that cool stuff. And as long as I don't go over $25, I still get to keep my $5 profit that's built into that $30 cost that I'm going to sell the game to for distributors. So that's one way that I approached lowering costs on independent game design. Now, other things that you can do, obviously, are you could run a Kickstarter for your project. I mean, you could plan to do your game in large quantities, and of course, economies of scale kick in. If you can get 1,500 people to buy your game, you can print it overseas in China with a company called Panda Games, and that will reduce your cost dramatically. And then you can afford to have the super nice color boxes and all the components and all the bells and whistles that you want. So, you know, obviously that's a goal for any game designers to get a really beautiful product at a really affordable price. And Kickstarter is one of the ways you can do that. Okay, so that's my little blog post for today. Let's go back here. All right, we're not going to have a presentation today, I don't think. Let me just check and see. I got to check and see about one person here. Participants. Okay, I don't see that student here. Let me look at my chat and see what's going on here. Okay. All right, great. All right, perfect. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is check in with you guys and ask you about your games. How are they going? Do we have some things we can look at? So how about you, Hunter? How are things going on your game?
They're going pretty good.
Yeah.
We haven't really gotten much more done, but it should be in a playable state now, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, cool.
We're still working out some of the kinks though.
Okay, so you'll definitely be in a playable state at the end of the month, and we can test it out.
Yes.
Okay, awesome, cool. Um, All right, let's see. How about some of the other guys? So Coulter, how's any progress on your game? Says I've only gotten one more card done. Been a slow week for me. Okay, understood. Yeah, keep in mind that we got this deadline coming up. So you guys might want to start by getting your game to a playable state. And that might be importing placeholder cards and chips or whatever into Tabletop Simulator and having a placeholder for everything that's going to be in the game. And then you go work on your artwork and, go ahead and swap that out with the placeholders as you finish things. But you might not want to wait and try and get all the art done and then import it into the game, because then if you don't get it all done, you don't have a game that we can play. And of course, testing out the prototype of the game is one way you're going to get a lot of good feedback, even if not all the artwork is done. Okay, so let's see. How about you, Jazz? Any progress on your game?
Not a lot. We had a bit of a discussion about mechanics. Can you guys hear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. A bit of a discussion about mechanics. At the end of last class, I asked the guys because, it's difficult to put my finger on it, but currently it just seems like stream of random. So I'm tossing about other ideas in my head to like restructure it to add more player choice to the game itself. And that's just a mechanical thing, that's reworking the card draw systems mostly.
Okay, so you want to give them a little more agency so they have a little more control over their fate within the game?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for the update, Jazz. And then let's see. Creed says he can show us some more artwork that Eduardo has been working on. He wanted me to show it for him. He couldn't make it to class because he doesn't have Wi-Fi. Okay, Creed. Well, I will stop my share, and I will enable advanced sharing so that you can share. Would that work, or are you going to need somebody to go into Discord for you or something? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so go ahead and feel free to share and show us your stuff, Creed. So I don't think Creed has a microphone today, so I guess we'll just be looking at cool stuff. Okay. Well, those illustrations were really cool. I thought, what did you guys think? Coulter says he likes his little legs. Sam is like, wow, they were really cool. Yeah, they are really cool, and they look really consistent too. They all seem to have that creepy Cthulhu vibe to them. So that looks really great. So Creed, good job for your team, and please pass our compliments on to Eduardo. Let's see. Sam says pretty creepy. Nick agrees with the fact that they were cool. Creed says, I thought so too. I'm sure Eduardo would be happy to hear that. Yeah. Yeah, he's doing great work. So keep up the good work. Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to share with us? Artwork or concepts or anything they want to bounce off us and get our feedback on? Let's see. Coulter says he really likes how exaggerated they are, the figures that Creed showed us. So I agree with that. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is we're going to continue with a little lecture from the textbook, and then we'll give you guys some time to work on your games, keeping in mind that deadline is just around the corner. So you guys, once again, maybe your first priority is to get a working something in Tabletop Simulator, even with just placeholders, as I said, and then start replacing that with your artwork and other cool stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen again, and I'm gonna go over here to the textbook, Challenges textbook, and we're going to talk about this, which is Elements of Strategic Skill, Chapter 6. So strategy is a very powerful draw for players. In fact, it's what keeps us coming back to games again and again. As Ralph Koster notes in his excellent book, A Theory of Fun for Game Design, we play games and enjoy the process because we're seeking to master the pattern in the game. While mastering a pattern, players are having fun. They're also forming strategy based on their understanding of the game's dynamics. That mastery, that development of strategy, isn't accidental. It's something the designer intended, or at least hoped for, though the use of mechanics, or through the use of mechanics that create strategy and tactics. As noted in the previous chapter, most games have at least a little bit of skill involved. Even games that seem like all luck, like rock, paper, scissors, have their own strategy websites. Wow, that's crazy. A strategy website for rock, paper, scissors? that's something. Okay. So how do we use skill in games? Let's see. Let me open up my chat here so I can see what you guys have to say. Boom. Yeah, Creed says, yeah, what? I was gonna say get a life, right? If you're checking the rock, paper, scissors website, but then of course that's kind of mean. And who knows, maybe we have some rock, paper, scissors fans who have subscriptions to the website. So my apologies for that evil comment I was thinking of saying. Okay, the role of skill in games. At its heart, a good game is a series of interesting decisions. Go right or left, build an offense or defensive unit, figure out what your unit should do next. The success of decisions, whether a mental or physical reaction, is a measure of player skill. All right, let me pull this up a little bit. Good games cause players to exercise their skills frequently and reward them with immediate and obvious feedback. Throughout play, the players wonder what things he should do next and next and next and next. Soon, he has entered what's known as the magic circle, when he has fallen through the monitor or TV and into the game world. The effect is similar to the one we enter when we watch a movie or read a particularly good book. But good games have a stronger pull because they integrate players and their decisions into the experience. So in other words, when you're watching a movie or a book, you're basically a passive observer. But things like virtual reality games or video games or board games pull you in because the decisions you make affect the gameplay. When the player is constantly making decisions, he enters a state that psychologists and noted research, oh boy, this name is going to kill me here. I think I'm going to do brain damage just trying to pronounce it. Mihaly, we'll say it starts with a C. I'm going to try. Csikszentmihalyi sent Mihaly, called flow. It's an optimal play state and one designers work hard to achieve. Mihaly wrote a whole book on the topic, Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. The book isn't limited to games, but covers this state from a wide perspective. So you've probably heard people talking about flow before. Professional sports players will talk about it. Musicians will talk about it. Actors, and now they're talking about it in regards to game design or playing games, I should say. Types of decisions. How much does player skill influence the outcome of a game? It depends on the decisions the game lets the player make, as well as the weight of those decisions. The extent that the player's actions affect the outcome of the game is broadly classified as skill, as opposed to factors outside of player influence called chance or luck. The player experiences largely involves making decisions that influence the game state. And we talked about the game state being, how many cards are on the board, who's dead. It's just, a snapshot in time of how the game is at that time. Therefore, a game designer focusing on the player experience should give a great deal of thought to what these decisions are and why making them is fun or interesting or compelling. If you make a choice and it has no effect on the game state, what's the point? There are many kinds of decisions found in games. Some decisions are more interesting than others and therefore offer more compelling play. Okay, obvious decisions. Here's a silly two-player game called the highest number game. The first player chooses a number, any number at all. Then after hearing the player's choice, the second person chooses a different number. Whoever says the highest number wins. This is not much of an interesting decision for the second player. A higher number wins, a lower number loses. The winning decision is obvious, so it's not much of a decision at all. These choices are not particularly compelling because there is no reason to make any choice other than the optimal one. Think this doesn't happen in real games? Consider the board game Talisman, where the primary mechanic is rolling a die and then moving along a track that many spaces are moving along on a track that many spaces, either clockwise or counterclockwise. The direction to move is certainly a choice, but much of the time, one space harms the player and the other space helps. So it is an obvious decision. So in other words, that's a bad mechanic because, if something's obvious, then it's not really a choice at all. You're going to go the way it doesn't harm you, right? Or consider an on-rails RPG or FPS where the player is constantly told which direction to move. The player may be making many decisions, but where to go next is not one of them. These games are fun for many other reasons, but not because of these obvious decisions. Some games even offer no decisions at all. Roll the dice, land on Park Place, pay your friends a lot of money. It's often at this stage of Monopoly that people begin waiting for the game to end. It's true. What do you guys think? Is that true of Monopoly? You guys, do we have Monopoly fans or haters out there?
I mean, everybody should be a Monopoly hater.
I don't think I've ever finished an actual game of Monopoly.
Right. Sometimes it kind of feels like we play Monopoly just because we're supposed to. It's like it's pretty much the only game the entire world knows about, so we should probably play it, right? But there's whole. I do a whole lecture on Monopoly at some point during the semester, and there's whole schools of thought about it being a really poorly designed game, and yet one of the most popular games out there. So this is an interesting point that they bring in here. Okay. In most cases, when the decision is blindingly obvious, a designer can remove the choice and make it automatic. For example, modern RPGs rarely require players to rest and eat in order to replenish their stamina, although many RPGs from the 1980s and early 1990s did. Instead, the games do this automatically by replenishing stamina over time and eliminating the need to eat entirely. Some FPS games, first-person shooter games, automatically reload the weapon when it's empty. By automating the trivial decisions, more focus is given to the interesting ones. Okay. Coulter says, I wish I could kick Mr. Monopoly in the money bags. Okay. I feel your pain, Coulter, or I feel his pain, I guess. All right. Another option is to take an obvious decision and add time pressure. Okay. So these are ways to make games more interesting. Automate an obvious decision, add time pressure to an obvious decision, changing it from a strategic decision to a test of dexterity. See Chapter 7, Elements of Twitch Skill for more information on these fast kinds of decisions. So real-time play, even obvious decisions become exciting because you have to do them in real time. Okay, meaningless decisions. The only thing more frustrating than a choice with an obvious right answer is a choice with no right or wrong answers at all. Though the choice is seemingly present, it has no effect on the game's outcome. Early RPGs were notorious for this. Dost thou wish to see the king? A servant would ask, and the player would be given a yes/no choice. If the player said yes, he went to see the king. If the player said no, the servant would respond, but thou must. He went to see the king. Wow, that's pretty good agency in that game. You get to decide everything. And the player would see the king anyway, even if he said no. The player was treated the same whether he said yes or no, so the choice itself was irrelevant. If decisions are interesting because they affect the outcome of the game, then meaningless decisions are not interesting because they don't affect anything. Again, it's usually better to eliminate these from the game entirely, so just make the guy go in and see the king, right? Or make it so they have a true choice to not see the king and then suffer the consequences of that choice. There's one caveat to this, however, and that caveat is player perception. Many modern games offer players a choice in narrative that doesn't actually affect the overall outcome of the game. However, the player certainly perceives that it does due to the way the game responds to them. Only upon replaying the game is it obvious to them that the route that they took the first time, the one that seems so crafted towards their choices, wasn't actually all that crafted at all. However, on the first play, the perception of choice makes those choices meaningful, right? So if you can't go for an actual choice, maybe create the perception of choice so people enjoy it at least the first time they play. Okay, blind decisions. In roulette, the player has a real decision of what number to bet on. The decision is not obvious because it is not clear ahead of time what the correct number is. This decision isn't meaningless as it affects the outcome of the game, but it's also not an interesting decision because the player has no information to base her choice on. It's entirely random. One number is as good as any other. The game is still compelling because it offers cold hard cash as a reward. Remove that, and the decisions themselves aren't entertaining in the least. More strategic games can inadvertently include these decisions as well. If a player approaches an NPC, a non-player character in a game, and is given a choice of how to introduce himself, with a secret handshake, a standard greeting, or by showing a badge, etc., without any additional information, the choice must be made blind. The decision becomes not only interesting, but rewarding if the player heard some rumors about the NPC player, or if the NPC introduces himself, herself, itself first. In general, blind decisions can be turned into other kinds of decisions by giving the player enough information. This does not mean complete information, by the way. As long as the player has some information on which to base a choice, the decision is not blind. In fact, some ongoing decisions are quite interesting because they change as more information is revealed over time. Now, do any of you guys have an example of this, a game you played where you had a blind decision to make, or you had a decision and you had partial information and that helped you make it? Okay. All right. So no examples there. So what I'm thinking is, like, if you were in some kind of role-playing game or something, or some kind of video game where there were non-player characters, and you talked to someone and they mentioned another character and they said, hey, he'll do anything for $1, I mean, he'll do anything for gold. So then when you run into that character, you know that the bribery is the way to get the information out of them. Okay, so let's continue on. So trade-offs. A trade-off happens when a player doesn't have enough resources to accomplish all of his goals. There's enough gold to buy either a better weapon or some better armor or a new spell. Pursue the escaping evil wizard or save the princess from the dragon. Hire an army of footmen or build a griffin hatchery and add some flyers. Pack a sniper rifle or an AK-47. Use the wand of explosions on the boss fight or save it for a later, potentially more difficult battle. None of these choices is clearly right or wrong, but all have advantages and disadvantages. All of a sudden, it feels like a real choice and an important one. Now, one game that comes to mind is the Call of Cthulhu, or the Cthulhu game that that Creed's working on, and giving the players the information in advance that at the end of the game that there could be betrayals, other players betraying you, or your choice to betray other players. So then every action that they take, they're making a choice about whether they want to expend that energy or that spell or that action or that strength, or they want to preserve as much of it as possible for the end game. And so Creed says, I know there was something like this in The Witcher, but I just can't remember anything specific in either. Yes, right, if the trade-off is worth it, right? So you got to make it worth it. So in Creed's game, there's that short-term pain for long-term gain would be one way to approach that or describe it. And you could have two entirely different kinds of players. You could have the tortoise and the hare, the player who's the hare, the rabbit. He wants to go spend every spell and expend and move through the game as quickly as possible. Creed, here's an idea. Games are more fun when there's multiple paths to victory, right? Or at least I think so. And so, you could make it so that there's such a case where, clearly the tortoise in your game, the one who's slow but sure, right? The person who expends the minimal amount of energy on every fight and saves up all their pennies for the rainy day, right? They're going to definitely do well at the end because they're going to blow everybody away. But you might consider having a mechanic where somebody who's the extreme opposite end of the spectrum, so not the middle people, not the people who make, different choices and go back and forth, but the person who's the extreme opposite of the tortoise, the hare, if one person just basically blows through every level and defeats everybody by wide margins or whatever, maybe when they get to the end, they get a bonus. And then that helps them, rewards them but for getting there first. And then they have a little bit of a balance against the players who kept all their eggs in the basket, right? It's a consideration. It might blow your whole, mechanic. I don't know, but something to think about. Okay. So it says, these kind of decisions can easily become obvious if one choice is better than another. A game is called balanced if the choices are weighted, so there's no single best method that always wins. So that's what I was just talking about. Create different paths to victory, right? When games offer several viable paths to victory and players must choose between them based on their personal styles and environmental factors in the game, the decisions made are quite interesting, right? So Sam says, I think if it's the same thing, there's a certain item in this RPG that you need like 3 of, and an NPC tells you that you can either buy it for like 2K a piece, or you can find it by doing X activity. Choice being time versus money. That's a great example, Sam. So yeah, exactly. And so you're giving people the choice. You know, if they want to save money, which they could then spend on other things, then they have to spend time, and somebody else could choose to spend the money and save the time and maybe get to the goal quicker and potentially get to the victory condition quicker and win the game. So you're giving people choice, and that's what's fun. And Creed, going back to your game too, I know I'm giving a lot of suggestions, but these are just popping in my head, so you can choose to ignore them or adhere to them or build on them or be inspired by them. But another idea, which is kind of off the chart, is, you know, you talked about people being betrayed at the end of the game, but what if you could betray them throughout the game, right? What if there was a mechanic that would allow you to basically, I know this is cruel, but what if you could throw somebody to the dogs? Like, what if you could sacrifice another player to save your own skin, and that would have both a positive and a negative effect to you? Like, you know, the positive effect is, this player that you threw to the dogs or to the mechs or whatever depleted their strength, so it was easy for you to defeat them and move on to the next level. But maybe there's something like a morale score for the whole team or for all the players, and maybe they have like perceptions of each other. Maybe the negative perception of you doubles every time you do this to one of the players, and so then at the end, those negative perceptions come into the decisions about who they're going to betray. Maybe even teammates decide to gang up on somebody who had some really poor action during the game. So Creed says, no, I appreciate it. Oh, right. If you win, you get their stat cards. That could make things so interesting. Yes. So, once again, the games are all about human nature. And the more, what is tantalizing to us about human nature? Well, let me give you a straight answer. It's not the good stuff, right? It's not, oh, he was so kind to me and he was so, he spoke so highly of me and was so polite. It's not that. It's the opposite. Oh, he backstabbed me. Oh, he had a secret plan going the whole time. Oh, he sold his soul for this gold. His army destroyed me for this vanity project. It's like, it's really the evil stuff. Why do we like Darth Vader more than Luke Skywalker? He's just more interesting, basically. Okay, so let's see. Dilemmas. A dilemma is similar to a trade-off, but occurs when all choices will harm the player. Oh, that's interesting. For example, in The Legend of Zelda, players could encounter a room where they had to either pay some money or permanently lower their maximum health. Wow. A special case is the prisoner's dilemma. Now, do you guys know about the prisoner's dilemma? Have any of you heard of it? Okay.
I have, but I couldn't recite it.
All right. I figured you probably had, Jez. A special case is the prisoner's dilemma, and Nick says the same. A famous problem from game theory. In the prisoner's dilemma, 2 players have to independently make a choice: attempt to cooperate with the other player or defect, i.e. stab your partner in the back. If both players cooperate, they each pay a minor penalty. If both players defect, they each pay a much heavier penalty. If one player defects while the other cooperates, the one who tried to cooperate pays a maximum penalty, while the one who defected gets no penalty at all. The reason this is a dilemma is that no matter what the opponent does, a player can reduce his personal penalty by defecting. So you're basically incentivizing people to take the evil route, right? However, by following this optimal strategy, players end up in this suboptimal situation of everyone defecting, which is worse than if everyone cooperated. Now, you guys may find this funny, but this always takes me back to high school. I went to high school here. I went to Rincon High, and there was one day. This is a funny story, and it relates exactly to this whole idea about defecting in the prisoner's dilemma. But I used to be on the track team, and there was one day that our coach called a track team practice on a Saturday. And so, all of the students showed up. We went to the gym, we got into our track clothes and everything. And unfortunately, the coach forgot. They forgot that they had called that Saturday practice. So they're there at the high school on a Saturday with no administration in attendance, was a bunch of highly motivated physical students who had nothing to do, right? So what did we do? Well, we created mischief. We went to the place called the senior patio, and we stole all the furniture and we put it in various places in the school. We just basically had a field day, the kind of stuff that any kid would do, if they were in such a situation. Anyway, of course, the neighbors, to Rincon, called the cops on us because they saw these kids on a Saturday meandering about the school. The police showed up in force, and they took us all into custody, and they took each one of us into a separate room. And this is where the prisoner's dilemma comes into play. Now, I'm glad that this wasn't like a murder trial or something, because then it would be much more grim. But basically, they took everybody into a separate room, and these are just high school kids who don't know anything, right? And they basically gave you the prisoner's dilemma choice. They said, if you cooperate, you'll get a lesser sentence. If you tell us, if you inform on your teammates, if you don't cooperate, we're going to give you the stiffest sentence possible. So what happened? What do you think happened? What happened to every single student that got taken into a separate room? Everybody cooperated.
Everybody
hoping
cooperated.
everyone
Exactly.
cooperated.
Every single person turned on everybody. Oh yeah. Oh, I don't want to get kicked out of school. So, and that was, the penalties to that were really humorous in retrospect. But what a lesson I learned. That was the prisoner's dilemma in real life. Right. And so now whenever I hear that phrase, or I think about incorporating it into a game, it brings a little smile to my face, because I think about the real world implications of that. Okay, so anyway, it says instances of prisoner's dilemma can be found in many games, especially turn-based strategy games. For example, in the board game Diplomacy, there are several locations on the board that give a large strategic advantage to any player who controls them. But the locations start out right in the middle between two opposing players. If both players cooperate, they can leave the area alone and do not have to waste resources fighting each other. But the threat of not fighting and just letting their opponent walk in unopposed is enough to keep both players tied up in a meaningless battle for the first part of the game. That's really clever to mess with people that way. The prisoner's dilemma has many variants. If players encounter a series of these decisions instead of just one, the dynamic changes greatly. Adding multiple players so that a small number of players defecting gets an advantage, but too many hurts everyone, changes things as well, especially if players have the ability to seek retribution against those who defected. Wow, seek retribution. It's kind of like your game, Creed, like basically taking score during the game to see who they're going to kill at the end. Let's see. Okay, if players don't know who cooperated and who defected, that can likewise change things, bringing in feelings of paranoia. And that can be fun too. Sometimes a game could be fun if you make everybody freak out. Like, for example, once, using your game again, Creed, just because it's a good example that's in front of me. We talked about the fact that people could defect or betray during the game. But let's talk about another aspect to that, which is, what if that betrayal were anonymous? What if what happened was, and I'm not sure quite how you would pull this off, but what if what happened was, during a battle, it became obvious that somebody had been betrayed. Like maybe there's a deck of cards. Maybe everybody puts a card down at the beginning of the round, and then every player, before they play their round, they have to pick up a card, and one of those cards is a betrayal, meaning you have to go lay down your life for all the others. So you're still getting the same net effect of the betrayal and somebody taking advantage of another player, but you're not knowing who it is, at least not until further in the game, when it's reduced down to just two players and it wasn't you, right? Right. And Creed says, right now, but no one trusts each other. So, Yeah, you get to decide. Remember, you're God when you design the game, and you get to decide, uh, you know, not only what situations people will be in, but how they'll feel about those situations. You know, are they going to feel paranoid and persecuted? Is that fun? You know, do you want people to feel that way? Are they going to feel empowered? You know, at different times, you may want these to conjure these different emotions. Um, okay, risk versus reward trade-offs. A form of trade-off, a risk versus reward trade-off, happens when the player finds herself faced with a situation which has multiple outcomes, but whose level of risk is different. It's not so much a question of which one of these right things do I want, but rather, am I willing to risk it all for a potentially huge payoff or death? For instance, in the Civilization series, players make many interesting choices, and there are many trade-offs to be had. Will you pursue a military victory or an economic one? At some juncture, the player may want to attack a neighboring civilization. In evaluating whether or not to launch the attack, the player considers the risk of the mission along with its potential reward. In attacking the Americans, will the player gain some technology that she desperately wants? Um, okay, these kind of trade-offs are common in board games with dice cards or other random mechanics. Players often have the option of making a safer move with a smaller reward or a risky move with a greater reward if it succeeds and a penalty if it fails. Now, to me, this is equivalent to finances in the real world. You can leave your money in the bank and get the redonkulous low amount of interest with no risk at all, or you can play the stock market, make it big or lose it all, right? And so that's reflected in the games. For example, in backgammon, a player might have a choice of whether to leave a piece exposed. If the opponent rolls well, the piece would be captured and the player is set back. Otherwise, the player has greatly improved board position on the following turn. Another example is spades, where players can build null, attempting to take no tricks in a hand. This bid is worth a lot of points if it succeeds, and it has a large penalty if it fails. It is also difficult to make, meaning that it is generally bid on only when players have unusual hands or when they are far enough behind that they may take huge risks out of desperation. In these games, typically, a player who's behind tends to take more risks in order to catch up, while a player in the lead prefers to play it safe in order to preserve his lead. Players exhibit similar behavior on the television game show Jeopardy! The tension between risk and reward can lead to some wonderfully tense dynamics. So that's something else you might consider in your games. I remember I did a game convention. I can't remember if it was Gen Con this year or the one that I did earlier in the year. I did an online game convention, and I was the host, and there were 4 people playing this game that I designed. And this one young guy, every single roll went against him. His luck was for nothing, right? Every roll, he got the worst possible roll. The other players were progressing. They were buying ships and fighting monsters and getting treasure. And this kid was basically staying home watching TV. He got no luck, right? And as a result, his enjoyment of the game suffered. Now, what that told me was that I would like to build in a game mechanic that accounts for that, accounts for the fact that somebody might have, you know, crappy luck, and maybe give them the opportunity to do a Hail Mary pass, right? With a big risk, potential big risk and big reward. Maybe at some point that character risks his life to move up to where everybody else is, you know? And what do they have to lose, really? I mean, they're losing the game anyway. So you know, you might consider where and when you might want to put options like that into your game. Okay, it says players also frequently encounter risk versus reward in RPGs and MMOs. If I try to take this creature out, there's a possibility that he will smear me into the ground. Ouch. On the other hand, he could have some awesome loot, right? Now let's see. All right, let me go ahead and finish this page, and then we'll call it a day. So just 2 more little sections here. Okay, frequency or anticipation of decisions. In creating decisions in games, designers sometimes forget that the frequency with which the player makes decisions is paramount. The quality of a game is affected if the player is only making decisions every 20 minutes versus every second, even if those decisions at the 20-minute mark are significant. A designer's goal at its lowest level is to keep the player's brain busy with possibilities. Games like The Sims or the Civilization series are excellent at providing the player with a constant series of positive choices. Which one of these good things will I do next? Granted, the player can deliberately decide to do things not conducive to good gameplay, but he always has multiple positive paths forward. There are some cases naturally where decisions are not frequent, but the anticipation of a known pending decision sustains the player with thoughts of what she may do when decision time rears its head. First-person shooter games with elevators or lifts provide a perfect example of this. Although the player cannot make a choice while in the elevator, the anticipation of a pending series of decisions is enough to hold her over. Likewise, the tunnels that sometimes lead up to a boss battle serve to build player anxiety and narrative tension and thus sustain a state of flow. So there's one idea for you right now. If you have players who are ultimately headed on their way to a boss battle, you could put something which is like a tunnel equivalent right before the boss. So in other words, they have to go through a series maybe they have to go through a canyon, or maybe they have to go through a forest, a darkened forest, or a forest that gets increasingly darker every round. You can build tension in the same way that people who make movies build tension, through a series of events and aesthetics that change to foretell what's going to happen soon. The darkening forest, the dangerous noises, the clock ticking down, all of these things which lead to the final battle. Okay, and finally, let's see, it says gamers and developers have borrowed the terms strategy and tactics from military jargon, although they are often misused. For example, many so-called real-time strategy games have more of a focus on tactics than strategy, right? So of course, tactics are the things that you actually do in the battle, and strategy is the overall plan. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. We'll pick this up, talk a little more about this on Wednesday, but I'd like to give you guys the rest of the period to work on your games. Please remember what I said earlier about focusing on getting a game that's playable, and then filling in the blanks with all your cool artwork and ideas after that. And look forward to seeing those. So I'm going to go ahead and jump out of the video here, but I'll still be on the class if you want to jump in with a question or you want to chat with me or anything like that. Okay. All right. So why don't you guys get together and work on your games, and I'll check in with you at the end of the class.